The Pacers keep winning. That's 4 in a row. That's 8 out of 10 for the surging Indiana Pacers, who find unique ways to win both games they played this weekend. Role players are stepping up. Everybody is looking connected. There's so much to talk about with this team on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, so much to get to. Another impressive Pacers weekend. Every time I'm talking about the Pacers after a weekend this season, it's after a win. They've won their final game of every weekend they've played, and this time they win a back-to-back, beating the Rockets in Houston, traveling back across time zones to Indy, beating the Magic at home on a very late heroic game. Very impressive weekend from the Pacers, who have won 4 games in a row, 8 out of 10, and are firmly entrenched in the Eastern Conference playoff picture right now. Today we're going to talk about the weekend that was, how the Pacers got it done against the Rockets and the Magic. Then we'll pivot to something I want to cover, which is role players stepping up, and it's not one specific guy every game, and that's what I think has been so impressive about it. And at the end, a lot of general updates about the team. Terry Taylor, Chris Duarte, Tyrese Halliburton, injury stuff, G League stuff. There's a lot to get to on the Pacer news front, but we will open with the Pacers' impressive weekend that was. They go into Houston Friday night. They go down 20 in the second quarter. They score 10 first quarter points. Looks like it's going to be their worst game in a while. And then they win by 8, and they have a dominant second half after Rick Carlisle gets ejected. Then they have to fly home. Questions about Halliburton's health and play the very next day, and they come back and get a big win. Big as in magnitude in terms of a back-to-back over the Orlando Magic, 114-113 to improve to 9-7. The Pacers did not get to 9 wins last season until 21 games into the year, till November 26th. They beat that this year in fewer games and by date, with a team that was not expected to be as good. They just continue to find ways to get it done. And this weekend was fascinating because the games were similar in that the Pacers fell behind early and still won, but they were not similar at all in terms of how they did it, right? In Houston, the Pacers' defense was key. They held the Rockets to 91 points. Their fourth quarter defense was sensational. Really, their second half defense in general was sensational. The Rockets in the second half of that game finished with 41 points, right? But then against the Magic, the very next night, the ginormous mammoth Orlando Magic, the Pacers have to score 63 points in the second half to get the win. Their offense is what clicked and changed that game. That is what's something about these Pacers team, especially in the month of November as they keep winning, that's been so impressive, is it's not like they're reliant on one style. They're very malleable to the shape of a game, and they can figure out how to get a win. And various guys stepped up in both games. We'll start with the Rockets game because the Pacers keep finding answers. This is the one that they've had the least often, right? Their defense carried them against Miami earlier this month, but that's pretty much the only game where their defense has been the huge thing that saved the game for them. I guess their fourth quarter defense specifically against Toronto was impressive, but in general, offense has been their thing. They're top 10 in offense over the whole season. But defense, like I said, 41 second half points allowed, really the second quarter even. They only gave up 25. I guess they didn't give up more than 25 in any quarter, but the defense looked worse in the first quarter when they only scored 10 points. But in general, that was their answer for the Rockets, who punched them in the mouth early. It was 25-10. The Pacers were down 20 points in the second quarter. It may be the most disconnected they've looked all season. Sometimes missing shots will do that, but a couple guys just figured it out. O'Shea Brissett hit his first 5 shots, I can't remember, in his best offensive game of the season. Rick Carlisle with a spirited ejection to light a fire under his team. The foul call was not the best. I understand why he was so frustrated, but that's not a second quarter result to that, but it did light a fire under his team. That was very helpful. Lloyd Pierce did a good job pushing the right buttons in the second half, playing Mathurin more, getting him up to 30 minutes, right? Getting Jalen Smith in for his third most minutes this season. Jalen Smith was excellent. He will get some focus in the second segment today, right? And then Halliburton, of course, finding his groove in the fourth quarter. All these answers were great, but really it was their defense that stepped up. They did a great job holding Houston to under 33-point attempts. They were poor attempts. They only made 6 of them, right? The Rockets turned it over 17 times. They did a good job winning the defensive rebounding battle, right? The Pacers found the answers that they needed, even when they shot under 30% from three in a game. That's a rare type of win for the Pacers this season, finding a way to win on defense when their shot's not falling, when they don't have the offensive grooves. Pacers' first win of the season, scoring less than 100. And this is fascinating, too, because the Rockets and Pacers both bottom 5 in defensive rating. This game's over-under in the SI Sportsbook was 236.5, right? That's enormous. Even in the NBA now, where teams are getting close to that a lot, that's a huge number for a projection, and they didn't even sniff it. The Pacers, this game finishes under 200, but the Pacers defense figured it out in a way that hasn't necessarily been the case for them this season. Impressive stuff en route to that win in a great fourth quarter when they really needed it. They did give up the lead for a brief moment early in the frame, but they held it for a while. We're up 10 later. And outside of a Tyrese Halliburton injury with 30 seconds to go, really a fantastic second half, and we'll talk about that injury later in the show. It did not cause him to miss any time. So defense, the name of the game for the Pacers. Now they're playing the Orlando Magic, who don't have a lot of guards, but they have a bunch of giant people, and that makes them really confusing to play against. And so defense, I thought, would be the key against Orlando. Can the Pacers, find some defense, find the right combos to slow down Orlando? And they did at times. Aaron Nesmith was unbelievably good in this game. We'll talk about him in the second segment as well. But it was the offense for the Pacers that they had to figure out to overcome their start against Orlando, right? They fell behind against Houston. They start defending better. They start playing with more spirit. They win. Against Orlando, the spirit was there. The effort was there. But Orlando is just huge. They clog up the driving lanes. They make offense miserable with just arms and size everywhere, like Franz Wagner and Bol and Wendell Carter all play at the same time, like Andrew Nembhard's guarding 6'11 players. Like, it's challenging in the way that they have to play the Magic, and they needed to figure out how they were going to generate offense. And Aaron Nesmith was one of the reasons they were able to. He was on fire in this game. Career high 19 points. He was one of the guys that was hitting the threes, 5 of them to be exact in this game. He was huge. And the other thing the Pacers did, this was another coaching button change. Lloyd Pierce did a good job. On Friday, on Saturday, Rick Carlisle says, you know what? What we're doing is not working. Every time we go on a run, the Magic answer it. They go small. They go small against a giant Orlando team. Terry Taylor at center next to O'Shea Brissett in the front court for the final 5 minutes and 22 seconds of the third quarter. Pacers trailing when Terry Taylor comes in. They get their lead up to 10 at one point at the end of that quarter, plus 8 stretch with Terry Taylor at the 5. And the Pacers carried that to a win. They had to battle back and forth in a crazy fourth quarter. They fall behind. They get back ahead. They fall behind again. They're down 4 late in this game before more Aaron Nesmith heroics. 4 lead changes in this game. 3 of them came in the fourth quarter. But the Pacers got it done because they found an offensive gear with 63 points in the second half. So a fascinating and impressive weekend from the Pacers in that, they fell behind in both games and had to come back and win. And that is still a big concern for the Pacers. Their starts are abysmal. They're still a bad first quarter team, but they keep finding answers. This team is very good at adjusting throughout the game, and they figured out what they had to do to get it done against 2 teams that, they should have beat anyway, but they did a very, very good job to get it done in a different way. It didn't require them to have one style to stick to. They could defend against Houston. They could lock in on that end, and they could find the offensive weapons to get it done against Orlando. That small ball moment was the big button push from Rick Carlisle Saturday night. So even though they battled in the fourth, they got it done against an Orlando team that was huge. Mathurin was awesome in the second half of that game. He came up with a huge rebound to save the game, as did Aaron Nesmith. And look, the Pacers just keep finding a way to win. They've got a good spirit. They've got a lot of smart guys who can change their style to the flow of the game. And that's a good recipe for success, right? That is what is going to work in the NBA. Being able to have high IQ and change your style and adapt as games go on has been very helpful for the Pacers so far and something they can continue to lean on. The defense has been better, especially in November. I don't think their season-long number should be ignored, but it's certainly been better in their second half of their ongoing season than the first half. And their offense is, of course, fantastic. So they're ahead of schedule from last year. They look great this year, and they got 2 awesome wins, even against low-quality opponents. To travel like that to Houston, immediately fly back to Indy, get in at 2 a.m., and be able to beat the Magic the very next day, who are a matchup nightmare, quite frankly, for the Pacers, who do not have the wings to throw at tall guys. Aaron Nesmith was awesome. Andrew Nembhard did some good stuff on defense. It was a really impressive weekend for the Pacers, and now they're 9-6 after 15 games. Such an impressive start from a team that nobody expected to be 9-6 at this point in the season. And a big part of that recently has been role players stepping up, and it's been someone different every day. And I think that's been a key for the Pacers. Why is this happening? Why are the Pacers getting such good games from role players and a different guy every game? Let's look into it, break it down, and figure out how the Pacers are being elevated by guys who you don't normally expect to step up and save them every game. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Don't you sometimes wish life came with a user manual, something you could read to give you the best advice you need or to tell you the next best thing to do? Unfortunately, life does not come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure, whether it's a career change, a new relationship, or becoming a parent. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient and accessible anywhere, 100% online. Therapy can help you with coping skills, self-empowerment, dealing with trauma. It's something for everyone. And as the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Why not check out Locked On Magic for your second listen? Hear what Philip Rossman-Reich has to say about Pacers Magic from Saturday, and of course, again, upcoming tonight. Perfect little clash in the same city sort of situation. I love when those pop up. Something that has really stood out to me about the Pacers of late, and this is something that I put this in my notes as something to talk about later in the segment, but I actually want to lead with it now that I'm thinking about how I want to approach this topic. Last year, I talked about this a lot for the Pacers. Even when they were healthy early in the season and they were hovering around 500, I think their best record last year was 14-16 or something like that. You know, Sabonis would play well and sniff a triple-double and guide their offense, and Brogdon, when he played, would do well enough to keep them in games, and Turner defense was always solid last year. They never quite got enough from the role guys to juice them up to get some wins, and that was always something I talked about after games, is they just needed one guy to step up. They needed Justin Holiday to hit 1/3 of his threes in a specific game. They need TJ McConnell to be a little more precise with his passing. They need someone like Jeremy Lamb to give them an offensive punch with the second unit, right? They just need one of the guys who you could call a role player on last year's team to step up and figure it out. And a lot of times they just didn't get it. They would maybe get one guy, but not the one that they needed on that particular night. And that was particularly brutal for a team that, yeah, they had some talented guys, but needed them to step up. Maybe it was O'Shea Brissett at times last year, right? Maybe it was Keelan Martin when he was in the rotation for a solid portion of last season. Whoever it was, Brad Wanamaker. None of the guys quite gave them enough. And that was quite often a problem for them because the stars of that team, stars in air quotes, can only do so much. This year, I've noticed, and this is something very stark difference from last year, it seems like every game in their recent run of success, again, 8 of their last 10, only one loss in the month of November. They had an 18-point lead in the second half of that game. As they're surging and playing well, it seems like every game, at least one, and oftentimes 2 or 3 role guys fill their role perfectly on one end or the other, or both, and sometimes even explode to a career night and fit in with what the stars are doing. They don't have to take away from what someone else does to be successful. I think that's been a big part of the Pacers' success recently. So I want to dive into it mostly because this weekend we saw fantastic games from Jalen Smith and Aaron Nesmith, who were Jalen Smith, huge in Houston, 18 rebounds, Aaron Nesmith, a career high 19 points the very next night. Just awesome stuff from those guys. So I wanted to dig into this, right? What is behind this phenomenon, or if anything, and what's been going on? How has this been working out? So starting the month off, they play the Heat, right? The Heat, this great defensive team. They've got size on the wing. Andrew Nembhard's starting, right? Or Andrew Nembhard does not start. Excuse me, he hasn't started yet. Andrew Nembhard plays a ton of minutes. This is the last game before he starts starting because Chris Duarte gets hurt early in the game, and he finishes with 6 assists plus 13. Fantastic defense on guys like Max Strus and guarding Tyler Hero on the final possession, and they get the win, right? That's something the Pacers didn't get last year as much. They didn't get the key bench player finding his groove at the right time against a good opponent. They got it that night. They beat Miami. Then they play New Orleans, right? Tough team. Probably maybe their best win of the season. this New Orleans game still to me. They get 3 guys having up to expectations or better games. Andrew Nembhard has 15 and 5 in the starting 5. This time, TJ McConnell has 10 points and 3 assists and only is 4 for 5 from the field and is completely cooking with the second unit. And Jalen Smith has a 15-point, 11 rebound double-double. And then you can overcome, worse nights from other guys when that's the case. Obviously, Miles Turner was terrific that game, but, Benedict Mather, and that was his worst game of the season, didn't matter as much because everybody else was absolutely spectacular, right? Buddy Hield shot 37.5% that night, didn't matter because all these role guys were spectacular. Then they play the Raptors, a team that has historically, last year the Raptors beat the Pacers by 40, a team that's given this Pacers team a ton of trouble in recent seasons. Isaiah Jackson goes 5 for 5, 10 points, 5 rebounds. O'Shea Brissett has his best game of the season at the time with 8 points and 3 boards. They needed all of that in the early fourth quarter to beat Toronto, to overcome a demon team. And hey, in that game, Tyrese Halliburton's worst game of the season. He only finished with 8 points that night. He was 3 for 14. They did not get as much from Andrew Nembhard that night, right? They needed someone to step up, and they got it with the second unit. Even Aaron Nesmith had 10 points that night, right? Every single game during their recent winning streak, someone has done it. Against Charlotte on this road trip, they got it from Andrew Nembhard. And then this weekend, 2 games that I want to highlight in a little more detail just because they're more recent. Jalen Smith against Houston was his most recent very impressive performance. 18 rebounds, right? He was swallowing up misses. They could not take him off the floor. 30 minutes and 7 seconds of time for Jalen Smith in that game. That's his 3rd most in a game this season, behind his 15 points in their win over the Wizards on ESPN. He was playing wonderful defense on Kyle Kuzma. And then the other one, when he was +8 in their incredible shooting game against Brooklyn, when he was guarding Kevin Durant that night and had 14 rebounds as well. That's his 2nd best game score. Basketball Reference's little box score game level indicator since joining the Pacers was that Houston game, right? He was awesome on the glass, and he combined it with 10 points. And against a Houston team that is not necessarily the best on defense or mobility on the inside, he didn't have to be this awesome scorer. In fact, he had 10 points on 10 shots. That's just okay. But he added 4 assists and 3 blocks as well, right? Like Jalen Smith did it all in this game in a way that he couldn't be taken off the floor. Lloyd Pierce let him play. It was the right decision. And also O'Shea Brissett, who had his best game of the season, 14 points, made his first, I believe, 5 shots in that game, 4 threes. He had 1 ugly miss, but you get 14 points from O'Shea Brissett, all of a sudden you can overcome, right? Only 17 and 7 from Turner, who's been ridiculous, right? Less than 10 assists for Halliburton is a substandard game for him. Buddy Hield only had 10 points in this game, right? Like they can overcome. Matherin was 4 for 14 in this game. They can overcome all that when Jalen Smith dominates in that way, and they get good games from O'Shea Brissett, right? And Smith's particular, who's kind of been a guy who's waxed and waned all season, had consecutive games on this road trip where he was right about at his average in points, like to be more consistent and to add the rebounds. That was huge from him in a way that the Pacers really needed in Houston. Then the very next night, they're taking on the Orlando Magic, who are, again, huge. I've oversaid that on the show at this point. But on that game, Andrew Nembhard looks lost, right, against the giant size, and Buddy Hield shoots 5 for 12, which is okay, but still, they need a little bit more in this game. Mather was a little off. He had 12 points on 12 shots. How about Aaron Nesmith for the hero role that night, right, overcoming some of these struggles? Career high 19 points, game high +17. That's a game high by a mile, by the way. No other pacer was better than +8, and that was Terry Taylor, who wasn't even really in the rotation. The rotation Pacers, only Buddy Hield was more than +3 besides Aaron Nesmith. He was unbelievable against the Rockets. He was bombing away from 3. He was finding little crevices to cut, and he had the most heroic play of the game. They could not take him off the floor. In fact, Rick Carlisle was talking about after the game, just seeing how Nesmith was playing, right? Getting in a stance, locking up Franz Wagner at times, even though Wagner had a great game, defending some very huge and talented Magic defenders. Carlisle said he thought about starting him in the second half. I don't know. He didn't say who over. I'd presume Nembhard, but either way, he didn't do it. But, that kind of speaks to the game Nesmith was having. And he ends up closing the game, which is more important anyway, and having a wonderful second half. And like I briefly mentioned at the beginning, a heroic play, right? Pacers are down 1 late, and Halliburton misses a 3 to give the Pacers the lead. And again, this Magic team is full of giants. Bulls in the lane, Wagner's in the lane, Wendell Carter's in the lane, and Aaron Nesmith jumps up over all those guys and gets the rebound, gets fouled, hits the free throws to ice the game. Heroic play in hit to cap off his best game of the season. Well deserved. So all this to say, as I just recapped a bunch of games you all have already seen, This is something the Pacers absolutely did not have last year. This is something good teams have. When their best players do not have a great game. And this is not to take away from what Mathurin and Turner and Halliburton and even Hield have done this season. Those guys have been the best players on the Pacers for a reason. They've been consistently good every night. But they don't have to be awesome every night for the Pacers to win. They can get these role guys stepping up in a way that they haven't had the grace of last season, that they barely had the grace of even when they were very good in the Victor Oladipo seasons, right? If Oladipo had an off night, they could sometimes win, but they were really reliant on other guys. That's why they stagnated a lot when they had to turn to Bojan Bogdanovic, the lead ball handler, right? They finally have now a team now where they have role guys who are capable of stepping up in a way to overcome the struggles of their better players. That's been a huge part of their success this season. I think that speaks a lot to the development staff that's been able to get these young guys into positions to succeed. The team vibe of, there's no bad apples is unfair to the last year's Pacers team. There were no bad apples on that team, but these guys really like to play for each other. I think James Johnson's been good at getting guys to do that and talk like that. I think they're all very good at it themselves, obviously. I think the vets have been good at talking about that, though. Carlisle's talked about it a bunch. O'Shea Brissett has talked about how important that is, right? They play for each other in a way that is contagious, and it's just working. They have an ability to get everybody involved. That starts with their leader, Tyrese Halliburton, but everybody shares the ball. Everybody moves. Everybody cuts. Everybody's cheering on everybody most of the time. They've had a few unspirited halves, but in general, this is something the Pacers have not had in the past. I think is a huge part of their success this season. Somebody can step up every game. So sometimes they do get an awesome game from all of Turner, Halliburton, Hield, and Mathurin all at the same time. New Orleans, for example, they were all great. But then when the role guys are also stepping up, they're just hard to beat. But a lot of the times, especially this month, as the Pacers are rolling into the playoff picture in the East, they can have bad games from their best players and overcome them because role players keep emerging every single night. And that is something the Pacers have not necessarily had in past seasons. I think that has a lot to do with their success right now. Now, there's still a lot to talk about with this Pacers team. Tyrese Halliburton nearly missed a game, somehow played. We have an update on Chris Duarte's status and Terry Taylor with a crazy G League game. But why is Terry Taylor in the G League at all? Let's talk about all that to close today's Locked On Pacers. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Tonight in the NBA, do you think Luka Doncic is going to score more or less than 26.5 points? Do you think LeBron's going to be a passing machine? Kevin Durant's going to be a rebounding guy? All that is what you can do on PrizePicks every single day. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, and you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. That's what I love about PrizePicks. You can't get beat by somebody with more time than you. It's just you versus their numbers. They offer projections in any sport you want to watch. NBA, NFL, MLB, tons of other sports, college level. They've got it all. And you can make your picks in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's safe. It's fast withdrawals. And it's operational over 30 states as well as Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, they'll give you $50. You get the idea. Don't forget, though, you got to use the promo code LOCKEDON to sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today for the latest news from around the sports world. Go beyond the box score with our local experts here at the Locked On Podcast Network on Locked On Sports Today. Listen wherever you get podcasts, YouTube, Odyssey, whatever, they've got it there. Let's close out talking about some Pacers updates. Sometimes I feel like these segments are short of what they should be because I feel like these are very important. I feel like being around this team a lot, there's a lot of stuff that gets overlooked because it's just like a news one-liner, but it's actually very important to the context of the team's season. And first of all, let's get through one of them. Chris Duarte, injured. He's been out since November 4th, only playing 5 minutes against the Miami Heat with a grade 2 ankle sprain that day. Rick Carlisle said that he could be out a couple weeks. Adrian Wojnarowski reported he could be out 4 to 6 weeks. We'll see. Team said they'd provide an update at some point. We haven't gotten anything from the team yet, but I did hear this weekend that Chris Duarte, doubtful for what the Pacers' current homestand is, probably will not be playing They're home through the day after Thanksgiving. On Friday, they play the Brooklyn Nets, but there's a chance he returns on their upcoming road trip, very long road trip, right? They play 7 games. It spans from November 27th, I believe, through December 7th. 7 games in about 14 days, all on the West Coast. Super tough. There's a chance he could return at that time. They've done well without him, obviously by record, but still, even as the Pacers have ratcheted up their defense and look better, they still have a better defensive rating this season with Duarte on the court than off the court, right? He's still a helpful player, and he's missing development time. That's, stinks for him. So having all this time without him is obviously a bummer. Pacers would prefer to have him than not. They have a long stretch coming up. Looking at one other guy who had a great 2 ankle sprain, LaMelo Ball, suffered it early October, and he was able to return for the Hornets in early November. He missed about a month, right? So November 4th was the day of Duarte's injury. Looking at that timeline, maybe December 2nd, Pacers play in Utah against the Jazz. They have a back-to-back starting on December 4th in Portland, and then they close it on December 7th in Minnie. I think one of those 4 games from the 2nd to the 7th seem like when I would think Chris Duarte could return, given we've seen him in practice. At first he was in sandals. Now he's in sneakers. Now he's playing a little bit more in a practice setting, just from what I can see. I don't know, I suppose, what he could do. But it seems like his return will be in the next about 10 days, maybe a little bit over 10 days. That might be a little too rosy of an estimate. But 10 to 12 days seems like close to when Chris Duarte will be back. And we will see. They surely would like to have him both for development and defensive purposes. Speaking of injuries, Tyrese Haliburton, what a trooper. What a trooper. It feels weird to talk about this, and I'll explain why as this segment goes. Tyrese Haliburton, brutally bad-looking ankle injury at the end of the Rockets game, 37 seconds to go. He has to be helped off, sort of, by some teammates, right? Looked really bad. They're on a back-to-back. I thought, no way Tyrese Haliburton's playing against the Magic. He did post-game media, though, which, if doing post-game media is rare for guys who suffer injuries, he did talk about it. And then he tweets that he's fine and says, go Pacers, Okay, stuff that's like, yeah, maybe it's not as bad as it looked in the moment, but also I still thought on a back-to-back with travel in between, I thought there was no way he was playing against the Magic. But then he did the testing before the game, where they test how much load you can put in your ankles and stuff, and he's good to go. He plays versus Orlando the very next day. He's completely off the injury report for tonight's game against Orlando. A very impressive recovery, and this is the reason this is hard to talk about, because, Rick Carlisle says, and he's right, he's absolutely right. He is absolutely right that a ton of dudes in the NBA would have taken the night off with an injury like that. And, fans will always say, of course, guys should play if they're healthy. Of course. That's not how the NBA is, right? The teams think long-term with all this stuff. Haliburton certainly did not have to play in this game. It says so much about him that he did and wanted to. And yes, the expectation should be if you're healthy, you play. I totally understand the awkwardness of discussing injuries and things like that with recoveries. But in this case, especially given the landscape of the NBA, I think this says a lot about Tyrese Haliburton, and I'm glad Rick Carlisle called this out the way he did as such a positive thing, that he wanted to play and did play. And ho-hum, 22 points, 14 assists. He's ready to go. He was awesome against the Magic. Saturday, he'll be very important again Monday night. Last little update here, Terry Taylor. And first of all, Terry Taylor was fantastic in that little burst, like I said, against Orlando on Saturday night. Right, he came in, got an offensive rebound and got an and one. And when he was at the free throw line is when they subbed in the lineup that, kind of put him in to the spot where he was the 5. And I wasn't sure when the sub happened if he ended up being the 5 because he was at the foul line or if that was the choice. But they went small on purpose. And Rick Carlisle said after the game, he was impactful. And he said, if you play him for short minutes, you've got a guy that's going to go in, play his minutes, and be in the absolute right places at all times, right? So Carlisle praises him for those 5 minutes of 22 seconds where the small ball was fantastic. Terry had, and even citing that Taylor had effective games against the Magic last year. That's part of why they wanted to turn to him in that instance. So Terry Taylor was really good. That said, despite him getting in there and being impactful in the win, he has not played much recently, right? He's played about 12 minutes in the last 10 games. He's played in four of the Pacers' last 10 games. Excuse me, it's very late. Under 12 total minutes in that span. So not getting much playing time despite a nice moment there. Pacers need to find a way to develop this guy. He's in his second year. He's still very young. And so the Mad Ants played Sunday. 5 p.m., and the Pacers assigned Terry Taylor to the Mad Ants. So he actually played for Fort Wayne on Sunday. He was awesome for the Mad Ants last year, of course. He averaged 18.9 points and 12.1 rebounds during the Showcase Cup games last year. He only played 4 regular season games, so those stats don't matter. He was terrific for Fort Wayne on Sunday night. I think he had 28 and 18. I had the stats up, and for some reason I was closing tabs between segments. I closed it. He had 29 points and 18 rebounds in a Mad Ants win. He dominated, and as you should. NBA players should look good in the G League, but that's just what he does. He did it last year over and over and over again. We'll see if he's back. I'm assuming he'll be back with the Pacers on Monday. I don't know if he'll play or not. That'd be 3 games in 3 days, but getting him game reps when he's not able to play as much with the Pacers is a good idea. And the Mad Ants play in Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Tuesday at home against the Cleveland Charge. So it would not surprise me if we see this again, where Terry Taylor is back with the Mad Ants on Tuesday to get some more reps. It's super easy. Like, he doesn't even have to travel up to Fort Wayne or anything. The other guy here is Goga. I wonder if Batadze, who hasn't been playing as much with the Pacers, would get some reps again at the G League level. The difference is, and full disclosure, I am not saying anyone declined anything or any talks happened. The way the rules are with G League assignments is if you have less than 3 years of experience, the team can just send you down. Whereas if you have 3 or more years of experience, it has to be agreed upon by the player and team. Very easy to send Terry Taylor to the G League. They just do it. Goga has to agree to it. I have no idea if they even asked him to go down or not. I'm not saying anything like that. That is how the rules work. So it would not surprise me, though, if Goga, who continues to not play, plays for Fort Wayne maybe on Tuesday. We'll see. It's going to be very fun to see them up close and in person on Tuesday. Expect a little bit of reporting on that from this here podcast tomorrow. Of course, though, we'll be talking about Pacers Magic round 2, what adjustments the Pacers made, and if they win 5 wins in a row, 10-6 Indiana Pacers. If that happens, they've been fantastic to start the season. There's so many good topics to talk about. Wednesday, we'll be talking Wolves and the Pacers' upcoming tough schedule. A lot of stuff coming this week. Very few guests this week, though. I don't want to make anyone's life more stressful or difficult during the Thanksgiving holiday week. So expect a lot of me, and I'll expect a lot of Pacers talk as usual here on Locked On Pacers. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day. We will see you tomorrow.